First of all, Professor Schreiber, congratulations on winning the Nagoya Medal of Organic Chemistry.
Thank you.
It's a really, really great honor for us that you come here and then perhaps in the coming days going to inspire young scientists. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Yeah. So taking this opportunity, we would like to ask you a couple of things. Perhaps most importantly, some messages
Sure.
to young scientists and chemists. So let me begin with asking you, how did you become interested in science?
My entry into science is probably not the conventional one. I had really no expectation to be a scientist. I had no training in scientist, for example, in high school. I went to college to take humanist literature, no expectation whatsoever, and stumbled into a class, my first class in chemistry ever. I had no idea what chemistry was. My exposure to chemistry at that point had been a Walt Disney movie, and a documentary, and I thought chemistry had something to do like the solar system. There were things that I learned later, electrons that would move around the center of an atom. I knew nothing. And I went into the chemistry class and had no idea what the professor was discussing, but I was stunned by the beauty of it. Later I learned the professor was drawing d orbitals with colored chalk.
Yeah, that's cool.
And I thought, if I didn't study literature, I always found art interesting. And suddenly I thought, so chemistry is like art.
It is.
It's like an art class. So I decided I would go ahead and take the class and fell in love with chemistry.
Wow.
That's how I got started.
So that means that if that teacher didn't write d orbital, but instead s orbital,
yes,
it might not be.
I may be writing novels right
now. Anyway.
or use colored chalk.
Yeah, but that's very interesting. So I agree that the science or chemistry closely related with art. That's right. Yeah.
I think that's why I became so interested in organic chemistry.
I see.
Because organic chemistry is about the molecules of life, and they themselves have great beauty in them. And they're like art objects.
Yes, exactly.
Right?
I completely agree. Yeah. Yes.
In my office, there are molecular models that I use as sculptures.
Yeah.
Non-scientists can come in.
Yes.
They won't know, but they'll find it like beautiful architecture.
Yeah, exactly. I agree. Yes. So, so moving on to the next question. So, what was the critical moment in your research, and when was that?
It's hard to pick one, but I'll take you to an extremely early one. I told you how I went from falling in love with chemistry and then organic chemistry because of the beauty of the molecules. When I was a young undergraduate at the University of Virginia in the US, and I'd learned the theory of chemical reactions in organic chemistry, but I'd actually never run an experiment, run a chemical transformation. And I loved the theory and the ability to push arrows and follow electrons, but all of a sudden running a reaction in a laboratory, you no longer, you didn't see the molecules. You saw a liquid in a flask. I'll never forget the exact reaction. It was 3-methylpyridine with a base, which I deprotonated, and I added to an ester, and I formed a carbon-carbon bond. But still, it seemed very abstract until I analyzed the product using NMR. And I could apply my understanding of theory to interpret it, and then the epiphany. I realized that even though these molecules were invisible to me, I felt like a choreographer, that I asked the molecules to dance, my dance. I instructed them. Even though I couldn't see them, when I ran the reaction and analyzed the product, I realized they were listening to me. This just seemed unbelievable. It made me then again fall in love not just with chemistry, but experimental chemistry and running chemical reactions. So that was early in the educational phase. In my own career, I think the most critical experiment I did was one where I had no business doing the experiment because years later, now I was a professor first at Yale and I moved to Harvard and was running more chemical reactions and organic synthesis experiments. But I became interested in a natural product and the protein it binds, which was a mystery. It was unknown. So synthetic chemistry allowed my student at that time to synthesize a molecule that would allow us to pull the protein out of an extract from a cell. And but I'd never studied a protein before. I hardly knew what a protein was. But I read and learned about running gels and so forth. And same feeling of almost like a miracle that we ran a gel, found the protein that a molecule called FK506 binds, and it was a band on a gel, cut it out, analyzed it, and it was a previously unknown protein. We had discovered a protein. We named it FKBP for FK506 binding protein. But for me, I realized that this was something different than I had done in chemistry before, and that this protein had been around probably for 1 billion years, but no human knew of its existence until my graduate student and I ran this experiment and discovered it. And so I thought, science is even more amazing. You can be the first person on the planet to know something. All the wisdom of all the people, you are the first. And so that was a thrilling moment that changed my view of expanding chemistry to the realm of living cells and ultimately animals and hopefully in the future humans.
Okay, that's a very, very interesting story. And I assume that around that time in your career, you more or less decided to seriously jump into the interdisciplinary research of chemistry and biology. And what were your thoughts?
So that was the critical experiment that cemented this is what I should do. Leading up to it was a slow process. Learning organic chemistry, I realized that in addition to these chemical reactions that were so fascinating, I love the three-dimensional shape of organic molecules. I love thinking about conformational analysis. But again, I had very little understanding of proteins. I didn't know what a protein was, and read a little bit and realized that proteins comprise this string of amino acids, and looked up the structure of the amino acids, and I realized, well, they're like little organic molecules just connected to each other, and started to wonder about the conformations of amino acids and their side chains. Then I realized, well, this is important for how the proteins adopt a three-dimensional structure. And I thought, I had always imagined that biology with big macromolecules like proteins and DNA was just completely different and unrelated to chemistry and organic chemistry and these very small molecules, but that actually it seemed like there was just a continuum. And that, so it made me feel that it was accessible. I could start to study these proteins. So I think it was that process of thinking about the greater complexity of larger molecules and living systems that brought, for me, chemistry and biology together.
I see. So that's interesting. I mean, it's interesting to know that you love conformational analysis.
Yes.
And always think about the structure-based and then everything in
Yes.
three-dimensional fashion. That's very nice. Yeah.
I think most chemists are attracted.
Yeah.
Organic chemists are
Organic
attracted
chemists,
to
yes,
because
yeah.
they like to think in three dimensions.
I see. That was nice. So now there's no boundary between chemistry and biologists in your group, I think, or there are any difference or barriers?
Well,
or
certainly the
challenges?
goal, and it's a goal that requires working at it every day,
Yeah.
is to integrate chemistry and biology. There are challenges because historically scientists have tended to be very discipline focused. The barriers that arise because of that are sometimes language. You know, a chemist will learn their own idiosyncratic language that's very specialized, and biologists will do the same. And then you bring the two together, and it's hard for them to communicate. So that continues to this day. But over the years, I've been very lucky. I think I tend now to, people know what my lab is like, and the young trainees who come, undergraduates, graduate students, postdoctorals, or even physician scientists, they know they're going to come to a lab where there's no language barriers. There are still maybe some technical, obviously people trained in biology and chemistry have slightly different technical know-how, but the goal is to come together, work shoulder to shoulder, and learn from each other how to do these kinds of experiments and how to think like a chemist, but also like a biologist. So it's still requires work, but it's getting better and better because of the young generation.
Yeah, that's, I think.
The young generation I found over
Yeah.
time, they're pretty fearless.
Yeah, fearless.
They want to go out and change the world, and they realize that, you know, the way you can do that probably best is to integrate these different disciplines.
Wow. But anyway, in the area of chemistry and biology,
Yes.
you did the tremendous things to convince people there's a power of small molecule that they can explore in biology and also use them to molecular therapeutics and so on.
Yes.
So I think that's going to continue. And now your standard is everyone's standard.
Well, you're very kind.
Really.
But you know, what you allude to, though, is yet another disciplinary boundary and yet another frontier. Because bridging chemistry and biology, understanding how living systems function and work, is exciting and important. But once you do that, it's very natural that you start to wonder how these biological processes become deranged in disease. And you start to think about the human condition, and you think about the excitement that maybe a knowledge of chemistry and biology and integrating the two could bring in the discipline of medicine. And that's a whole new, you know, now you talk to physicians and you talk to people who think in terms of not molecules and not cells, but in physiology and whole organisms. And you learn the language of disease. But that's the big frontier, I think, for all of us in the life sciences. It's just natural that we'll try to take what we've learned and apply it to think about mitigating suffering and death from disease.
So that's kind of the new frontier that you can foresee that might be interesting.
I think so.
And then in particular in your research group, so
Yes.
what is your kind of the next challenges or the next goal that you wanted to look for?
Yeah, so even like the initial transition, it was all a lot of by chance circumstances, and studied a molecule. I mentioned FK506, and it affected immune cells, and that got us thinking about the immune system. And from there, in my own path, I've spent most of my time thinking about cancer and microbes and pathogens that cause disease. In fact, tomorrow my Nagoya lectures will be on primarily those two topics of cancer and infectious disease. But in thinking about what we've learned and thinking about the biggest problems and challenges out there, well, those are still big ones, there's no doubt. But probably the most daunting of all of them are anything to do with the human brain.
I see.
Neurodegenerative disease, Alzheimer's disease, Parkinson's, many degenerative diseases, and the psychiatric disorders, like schizophrenia and bipolar disorder and autism and mood disorders. These affect an enormous population, and these are diseases that are like a black box. Mm-hmm. We virtually have no molecular understanding of these disorders of the brain. So in contrast to something like cancer today or infection by pathogens, where actually the amount of knowledge we have is pretty stunning, and it's very actionable and allows you to make real progress towards new medicines. For me, if I were a young scientist entering into this world today, you'd have to be pretty courageous, because there's going to be a lot of gaps in our knowledge to fill, but I think I'd be attracted to studying the brain and disorders of the brain. And I think this chemistry, biology, integrated approach is going to be key to studying the brain.
Wow, that's very interesting things, because, I'm sorry, it's my story, but that one time when I was an undergrad student, I had that one critical moment having a hard time deciding which to go, either chemistry or brain science.
Wow.
But I took chemistry because I already fell in love with molecules. So anyway.
Well, but you never know where it's going to take you.
I know.
Probably you make the right decision, because if you'd gone to the neuroscience, brain science route, it may have been very difficult to come back and learn the basics of chemistry.
Right. Yes.
And now that you have the basics of chemistry, you have the freedom to rise up to systems of greater complexity like the brain. It's a funny way how science works now. It's not unidirectional, but it's kind of favors a direction of chemistry towards biology, towards medicine, rather than the opposite.
Yeah, that's interesting. Anyway, well, thanks for the encouragement. But I mean, I'm not that young anymore, and there are a lot of young scientists. Wanted to hear you, sort of the message from you. So can you end this interview by?
I think we've entered an amazing period of time where the amount of knowledge we have today about pathology, about physiology, it is the first time that we can think in terms of your lifetime, especially the young generation out there who can think in terms of 3, 4, if you're lucky, maybe 5 decades of science, where you can think about taking out a disease in your lifetime. Had anyone said something like that to me when I was, sitting in this chemistry class or learning about these things, it would just be absurd. It's just not possible then. It's still not easy by any means, But I think it's very believable that a young scientist today wants to dedicate themselves to something hugely important and hugely challenging. Take out a disease in your lifetime, that's possible. It'll take a lot of work, a lot of, but it's exciting work.
Yeah, yeah.
You know? So I think society has invested a lot in science and in scientists.
Sure.
And we owe it to society to pay back in terms of what non-scientists hope science can deliver. And now there's a path forward to do that. And I hope the young generation is willing to undertake those big challenges.
Yeah, that's a great message. So, thank you very much, Professor Schreiber.
My pleasure.
Yeah,
Yes.
thank you very much.
Thank you.